Hi all, and welcome to the second Mainstage event of the esela Virtual Conference 2021. Thank you for joining us. My name is Juan Mujica, and I'm a legal scholar serving as academic coordinator of the project Purpose-Driven Companies and the Regulation of the Fourth Sector in Ibero-America. Since 2019, I've been working with the sponsoring organizations, the Ibero-American General Secretariat, the United Nations Development Program, and the International Development Research Center, Idrc, to generate and share knowledge on the importance of an adequate regulation of the fourth sector. This project seeks to promote a policy roadmap and redesign the Ibero-American legal framework for purpose-driven companies that contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. To explore such redesign, the project covers the state of legal models of purpose-driven companies and its regulatory frameworks with three main goals. First, it compares the legal models of purpose-driven companies in more than 15 countries of Ibero-America and abroad. Second, it sets out the main legislative and regulatory best practices, as well as looking at financial and technical obstacles. Finally, it presents public policy proposals that include an analysis on impact measurement as an important way to access tax incentives and sustainable public procurement. The project will be launched in May with a unique opportunity to bring to the table legislators, policymakers, and experts to discuss this emerging topic in our region. To give a preview of the project and how public policy and regulation is shaping the fourth sector in Ibero-America, I would like to introduce you to our amazing panelists. Rebeca Grynspan, Ibero-American Secretary General. She has served as Second Vice President of Costa Rica and as the United Nations Under Secretary General. Thank you, Rebeca, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, UNDP's Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. He has served before as Practice Manager of the World Bank's Poverty and Equity Global Practice. Thank you, Luis Felipe.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
And Federico Burone, IDRC's Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean. Federico has served before as IDRC's Vice President. Welcome, Federico. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure being part of this conversation of the group.
Thank you all for being here with us today, and we appreciate your time and valuable insights. Our panelists are leading organizations that advocate for sustainable development, and through this multi-stakeholder initiative, they have the ultimate goal to promote an informed debate on the regulation of purpose-driven companies and the different legal tools that would accelerate these transitions towards a more sustainable business. This panel will have 3 rounds of specific questions for each panelist, covering 3 important topics. So let's start. The first round is about each of your organizations and the link with them to the SDGs. So I would like to ask Rebeca first. For the last 15 years, the Ibero-American General Secretariat has been a meeting point for Latin American countries and countries of the Iberian Peninsula. Could you share with us about your organization's vision on the role of multilateralism in achieving the SDGs?
Thank you very much, Juan Diego. And let me congratulate esela for this wonderful conference. I've been following some of the topics that have been discussed, and they cannot be more timely and more important for our times. Let me also tell Federico how happy we are to partner with IDRC in this event and in this subject. And IDRC is such an important organization that we have known for so long in our career. So thank you really very much. And for sure to my very good friend, Luis Felipe Lopez Calva, and that is now in an organization that I cherish so much. So UNDP, thank you, Luis Felipe, also for everything we do together. So let me start by saying that the multilateralism is more important today than ever. But the truth is that it has had a good phase and a bad phase during this pandemic. And we should be aware of both, I think. On the one hand, we must recognize that multilateralism has been fragmented during the pandemic, especially at the highest level discussion. I think that there has been much more collaboration in the base of the pyramid than in the top of the pyramid. We have seen the success of the collaboration in the scientific community, for example, that the success of having vaccines in such a short time compared to other periods in humanity. But the success of the scientific community has not been matched by the success of governance of the situation. So at the beginning of the pandemic, what we saw was not only a national response, because we can understand that, but a nationalistic response, precisely in a pandemic where we have to be aware that nobody will be able to give a step forward if we left somebody behind. And that is really the center of the discussion. The awareness that we have to have that in this pandemic, unless we make it accessible to all the vaccination possibilities, we won't get out of this pandemic, not one country alone and not one person in the world, since the virus will continue to mutate, and so the pandemic will continue in the world. So my point is that we need more cooperation, more coordination than competition, and that the multilateral organizations that are on top of leading in this pandemic, like the World Health Organization, are more important, but we need to give them more instruments to be able to perform at the level that we need during this crisis. So we have to think about it. I am in a group in the G20 precisely looking at this, looking at the preparedness and response for future pandemics, and also making recommendations to this one. And I think that we have a lot of work ahead, so we will be ready next time, and the national institutions and instruments will be available for us to really face a crisis in a pandemic like this in a different way than we have had now. Let me just finalize that we need to pitch for to close the gap that we have in the COVAX mechanism, that is the mechanism to provide vaccines to the poor and vulnerable countries, and the ACTA framework in which we have to share knowledge and the possibilities for being able to make the vaccines in many parts of the world. So there is a deficit. We have a deficit of $22,000, $1 million, $1 million, not 22,000, 22,000 million. And we need to close that gap if we want really to get to a new normal that will be not only new, but will be better than the point where we started.
Thank you, Rebeca. It is undoubtedly our age's challenge to address these vaccine, and the role of multilateralism couldn't be more necessary right now. And in that sense, I would like to ask the next question to Luis Felipe regarding UNDP as one of the custodians of that 2030 agenda in our region. working to address barriers that prevent countries from achieving their development or objectives. What would you say, Luis Felipe, that are some of the main areas or main challenges that the region face, Latin America, in its development trajectory, and how have been this region impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, such as Rebeca was describing before?
Thank you very much, Juan Diego. Also, my gratitude and recognition to esela for this excellent initiative, and very warm regards to Rebeca Grynspan at SEGIB and Federico at Idrc. It's also great to partner with you, Federico, as well. So I think it is important, as you know, in 2015, 193 countries signed a very important political document, that is the Agenda 2030, that establishes the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We were hoping at that time, as I've said in other fora, that we were transitioning from a world, from an equilibrium based on ideology to an equilibrium based on ideals. And I think that is a very important milestone in terms of the political ambition that is established. So after that, of course, the work was on the political side to appropriate this at the national and subnational levels, and to find the instruments to make them possible, right? So in Latin America and the Caribbean particularly, we have insisted that even though we are characterized as middle-income countries, we have not been able to consolidate middle-class societies, cohesive, thriving middle-class societies. And there are three main constraints, and this is addressing your question, Juan Diego. One is very low, stagnated and even falling levels of productivity, very low growth due to very low productivity. Second, very high level of inequality with a very clear indication of exclusion of many important groups in society. And the third is very high levels of vulnerability. At the same time, this is combined with a situation in which the trust in institutions was falling. So all these elements, when the COVID-19 hits the region, these aspects are magnified, or are amplified. So what we see is now a situation in which we need to find engines for recovery. As Rebeca said, it's fundamental to have universal vaccination as soon as possible. We need to solve the financial constraints that the countries are facing. We need to reopen the schools as three fundamental conditions. But then we have to address the massive supply shock that the economy faced during this crisis. And for this, I think it is very important to find these engines. But following on what Rebeca said, I would say that we need to find engines that incorporate these structural aspects that we mentioned before. So we need to bring new ways to be productive, but at the same time to be more inclusive and more resilient. And for that, we need to build the architecture, the institutional architecture for this to happen. So we will have time to elaborate more on this, but that's why I see this particular work extremely important. In a way, we started this work a few years ago, but now that we come into this juncture, critical juncture, this work becomes particularly important because of the type of engines of recovery that we need. But we will have time to elaborate more on that.
Thank you, Luis Felipe. And it's, as you say, and as Rebeca said, a very important issue in these changing times. So by starting to work pre-pandemic, we are arriving to a launch of the project that will be timely and revolutionary. In that way, I would like to ask Federico, who Idrc has recently joined initiative. Idrc is working currently towards a more sustainable and inclusive world through your new 2030 strategy, to mobilize global alliances like this one to support the developing world and addressing climate change and inequalities. Could you share with us, Federico, the story behind IDRC actions in regard with the 2030 plans and the priority that you're giving towards sustainable, inclusive economies in this new plan?
Thank you, Juan Diego. Let me just reiterate what my fellow panelists mentioned regarding the importance of these events, the congratulations and recognition of the work that is being conducted by esela, and this opportunity to share with you where we can go together. As you said, I mean, mobilizing this alliance. And thank you for allowing IDRC to join an initiative that was already moving forward. The story behind IDRC is a fabulous story. I mean, we just celebrated 50 years of our existence. It's a public Canadian corporation that reports to the Canadian Parliament with one specific mandate: support research and researchers in the field on those issues we think there is a possibility of making a difference in terms of innovating regarding policies, regarding practices. So IDRC just, as you said, I mean, approved a new strategy that will guide us towards the future, strategy 2030. In these 10 years of work, what we are trying to do is to continue doing what we are doing in these 50 years of our story, supporting research, high quality research, but also positioning IDRC differently as an entity, an institution that will share the creation of new knowledge. It's not just now an institution that is supporting research and researchers, but it's an institution that will develop jointly with our grantees new knowledge, the synthesis, embarking into one of the key tools we probably will be discussing over this event, which is how we can better translate knowledge to allow other actors, including the private sector, to be more proactively be part of all the challenges that, I mean, Rebeca and Luis Felipe, who preceded me in the use of the word, just elaborated. So we have 5 lines of programming. One, as you indicated, is our programming on sustainable and inclusive economies. In that particular line of programming, which is the one that is connected with the work you are doing and the project that is convening us today, we would like to really enhance the evidence, the base of knowledge that could support sustainable development that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So issues such as improve climate resilience, foster shared prosperity, ensure that prosperity is being shared not just by let's say, the regular larger players participate in sharing prosperity, and expand particular opportunities for women and youth in developing contexts, of course. So this is exactly where we are going, and this is where we are locating our appetite, our interest, and our current relationship with our partners, international partners, and yourself. The pandemic, as it was mentioned before, clearly oblige us to even increase our agility and search for new forms to accelerate transformations, changes. And in recent months, we just approved a very large initiative, global initiative, supporting 50 different research centers across the globe that are looking at what are the pillars, what could be the pillars in order to build a more inclusive and future, including the private sector, key player in that sense. So what will be the conditions for recreating the pillars, the foundations for economic growth? I'm happy to mention in this event today that in addition to this investment that we are doing supporting the 50 research centers that are working locally, but also in a global platform, we are just announcing a call for concept notes to through our programming on sustainable and inclusive economics, in order to understand what are the key innovations on the generation and use of local locally relevant evidence on women economic empowerment in low-carbon COVID-19 potential recovery actions. And again, we would like to connect this line of programming with the findings and recommendations that are emerging from the project that we are discussing today. Back to you, Juan Diego, to continue with the conversation.
Thank you, Federico, and thank you, Luis Felipe and Rebeca, for your opening remarks. It's timely to go to the second round of questions, which go, as we say in Spanish, aterrizan in our project. So I would like to first ask Rebeca, while we have been working on this international research project since late 2019, in person, with the incredible leadership of the Ibero-American General Secretariat, your organization's first research on the fourth sector. Could you tell us, Rebeca, how the interest on the fourth sector arose, what have been the SEGIB's main studies, and what is the ultimate goal of the study that we are pre-launching today?
Thank you very much, Juan Diego, and very interesting the points that Federico and Luis Felipe made. Let me put it this way. Maybe it's a simplistic way to put it, but we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals without alliances, like was said, yes? And one of the alliances is with the private sector. So the point is that we cannot act only pre-market and after-market. Yes, we need to act in the market because if we don't change the way in which the model of production and consumption, so we won't be able to really achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's how we got to the idea of the fourth sector, to a new model of behavior of production within the firms, within the private sector, not like an afterthought, but in what they do every day to run their business. So that's how we got that, our interest. So we started really to make some studies to understand what was happening. And we arrived at three major points through the different research projects that we went into. First, that is a very important one, is that the what we call the fourth sector or triple impact or B Corps, whatever you call them, yes, it has fundamentally emerged from a citizen's concern. So there is a change in the perception of the citizens with respect to the role that the private sector has to play. And I think that it also comes from our youth. And they want to align their values with their work, with what they do, with their entrepreneurship, to put it that way. So this is, in my view, a citizens-led movement, a movement of people who increasingly show awareness of how environmental, social, and economic issues are imbalanced in the private sector and how these imbalances affect us all. Let me give only a few numbers, yes? More in our first research, more than 90% of the people surveyed were concerned about the issues of climate change and inequality. This is in Latin America, and we have been partnering with UNDP in all this process. That has been a very important ally and support for us. 91% believe that business models needed to change. And 2 out of 3 believe that companies should contribute to sustainable development goals. And last point, 86% thought that companies that have a social impact should be supported, either by fiscal policies or by greater access to government procurement. That is precisely what we are trying to understand now. Yes, what are the regulations, the normative framework that we can have to really potentiate this change of model? My second point is that the fourth sector has grown very variably and much more than we expected. When we tried to have an indicator of how much that sector was already alive and well in Latin America, it was very surprising to find that really there is much more of these companies that we acknowledged before. We estimated that 6% of our total economy unemployment are part of this new movement, let's put it that way. Around 10 million workers in the region, around 170,000 purpose-driven enterprise in Latin America. And my third and final point is that these companies have not only grown organically and are not only very numerous, but that indeed they are very good for us all helping to achieve the SDGs, because that's the other question we asked in the research we did with UNDP in terms of what is the impact? Does it really has an impact? And there also the results were surprising. For 15 of the 17 SDGs, at least 40% of their targets are affected by the companies that we studied in terms of impact. So the SDG 1, end of poverty, the NDG of partnerships, and the SDG of gender equality that is so important for the achievement of all the SDGs were really impacted by these fourth sector companies. So I don't have time to go farther in terms of what are the catalysts and the inhibitors of to potentiate what this fourth sector does or these companies and businesses do. But believe me, this is a game changer in my view. And one of the things that have been very give us hope in terms of what is happening is that I have found very big companies that are telling me if we don't align our interest with the values of the new generations, we don't have a future. The sustainability of the company is at stake. And one of the elements, the elements recently that we saw is this letter of Larry Fink, that is the CEO of BlackRock. Yes, that is the most important investment fund, that is saying the companies that comply with the indicators of ESG, environment, social, and governance, are doing much better than the other companies. So I have faith and I am optimistic in terms of the future of the economy, not in spite of sustainability, not in spite of ESG, but because of it. And I think that that's why I really believe that this is a new thing that is taken off the ground with the energy, with dynamism, and that we need to help this site, or to put it blindly, this very important part of achieving the SDGs that don't have to do only with what this public sector does, but with what the private sector does in a different way to achieve the SDGs. That's my pitch.
Thank you, Rebeca. And it's outstanding how this past research by both SEGIB, UNDP, and separately by Idrc is having real consequences in the region by legislator, policymakers citing this research in the legislative process of benefit corporation legislations, here called BIC legislation, and other public policy. So it's a gradual work through the academia that it's building this knowledge. In that way, I would like to ask Luis Felipe, in the same way we started this research half a year, like 1.5 years ago, when we had no idea that COVID was coming. But we had a very clear interest and understanding of the phenomenon of the fourth sector in the region for its more and better management. How does enabling an enabling environment for a dynamic sports to the development objectives that UNDP is promoting around the Latin American and Caribbean region? In other words, Luis Felipe, why is this important for UNDP?
Thank you, Juan Diego. I think this is a question that allows me to very briefly go back in terms of the tradition of UNDP as a disruptor in the sense of the way we think about development. So in 1990, we published the first human development report globally that really at that point was severely criticized by many academics. They say, well, and the point was we have to go beyond the GDP, right? And we created a very imperfect index, the Human Development Index, that was qualified by some very important academic, globally famous, who said, UNDP is turning 3 numbers I understand into 1 number I don't understand. So we were severely criticized at that point, but eventually the thinking of other organizations caught up to this idea of we have to go beyond GDP. In 2010, UNDP published the Multidimensional Poverty Index, and it created a reaction also by saying that we were so, complicating things, that poverty was a monetary phenomenon, a lot of discussion. Eventually, the world caught up to that position that UNDP put on the table. On the 30th anniversary of our Human Development Report, we just published a report on what is called Human Development and the Anthropocene. And we discuss the idea that is being put on the table by many scientists, saying that we are starting sort of a new geological era in which humans, through their actions, are shaping the dynamics of nature. So nature is not anymore a determinant of what humans can do or a constraint, but rather humans are shaping the dynamics of certain important natural phenomena. And this implies a huge risk in many respects. And we analyze all these aspects. Projects like this allow us, these are like runways to land, ideas that look very abstract in the report. But then when you go back into what to do, we talk about the importance of changing social norms, changing incentives, and trying to find what is called nature-based solutions. And I want to link it here now with what Rebeca was saying in the following sense. We also see that 2 fundamental audiences that will, on the demand and on the entrepreneurial side, will drive this agenda are youth and women. I think these are fundamental drivers of this social change. And the institutions have to align to this kind of thinking. But when we talk about incentives, it seems a little bit abstract. Let me tell you very concretely 3 elements that I believe will be drivers that can enable this type of change in terms of the way we understand entrepreneurship with a purpose. So what is called the fourth sector. One is the political market. I think it is politicians that do not commit to the environmental and social aspects, fundamentally to sustainability in a broad sense, will start to lose market in politics. I think even when in the short run, we see a recarbonization, we can call it, of the discourse, I think this is a trend that cannot be stopped. So the political market will be an incentive to move in that direction. Second, consumption patterns. As Rebecca said, people want to consume with the notion, and we have projects, for example, in Ecuador about responsible consumption, in which we try to, using technology to try to connect the consumer with the producer, so the consumer has more information about the whole chain, value chain of the product, and how is it linked to socially and environmental goals. So consumption patterns are going to be another very important driver of this change. And the final is finance. As Rebecca said, more and more investors want to put their money in projects that have this ESG as a purpose-driven type of business. We saw it recently, even though we accompanied Mexico in the issuing of an SDG bond. This was a sovereign bond, but we could talk because we accompanied Russia, and we talked to the investors, and we saw the questions they were asking in that conversation, how interested they are in growing that market in which the money goes into financing of projects that have fully incorporated the ESG. But again, finally, in order to move to the next section, I want to say that for this to accelerate in terms of speed, we need to adapt the institutional setup, because we don't want these companies to be punished by fiscal rules, by other type of, or lose competitiveness because of the institutional environment. We rather want to have an institutional setting, a governance setting, that actually allows these type of companies to flourish. And this is exactly what this project is trying to do. So I think in that sense, again, this is really a very important instrument for a recovery to a better normal in this context. Back to you, Juan Diego.
Thank you, Luis Felipe. And as Rebecca and you were saying, it is hyper important to rethink our legal systems, to engage with the aspects you were describing in your intervention. One of the things we're noticing in the Latin American region with purpose-driven companies is that the laws, usually because of a legal strategy, do not have or take in anything related to taxation, to public procurement. It's only a very, cold legal model type. And we have realized that that's not enough. So it is quintessential that international organizations and governments are paying attention to these topics. In that sense, I would like to ask you, Federico, IDRC has supported since the start with several organizations such as eselaVC, the early discussions by Latin American lawyers and policymakers on the adoption of pursuing companies' legal models, the most famous SEGIB, and other public policies such as sustainable public procurement. We would like to know what are the main initiatives and areas of research on this emerging field that the IDRC has supported in the topics related to the fourth sector in an effort to strengthen the environment that Luis Felipe was mentioning, to have impact business and investment to scale up in the near future.
Super clear question too. I think as we are discussing, and I mentioned before, IDRC is evolving towards, the new strategy, and in that evolution is building on several elements that we were testing in recent years. I'm not necessarily here adding much knowledge indicating that, we are all fully aware of what Agenda 2030, the SDGs, in us regarding the importance of going beyond what we can call traditional actors in terms of the public sector, the philanthropic component, if we are serious about achieving improvements or achieve the SDGs, even taking into account now the challenges that are adding associated with the COVID-19, the pandemics. In that sense, we know well that something completely new is being required, and there is a very interesting set of actors that, frankly, were working in some cases with the contribution or help of international funders, international institutions, but in many other cases, simply following the signals of the market. So our programming, our contribution is trying to really connect what we can initially define as driven, facilitated by the contribution of international institutions and those that are trying to read the signals of the market. As you said, Juan Diego, there is a need of understanding how the systems, how the regulatory frameworks, how the policies, what are the signals that are being read by those that are trying to react to opportunities in the market. So now entering into specifically your question, what we are doing, what is in our portfolio that is connecting these different movements. On one side, we have a very large portfolio that is trying to improve the metrics, measurement, how companies that are entering into these two streams could be able to build a data system, could be able to measure the serious, the roadmap, the trustability of impacts that have been achieved at the social and environmental level. And we don't want to just see or create one system, but we want to certainly create systems that could be trusted by different type of social actors. So we are working on that issue, and in this case, there are several tools. One is, for example, the SDGs Action Manager, which is being built in collaboration with the B Lab and the Sistema B group of corporations that is essentially trying to experiment with different ways of measuring impact and trying to gradually build the database for companies that could be introducing their data and obtain the support of experts and other companies to improve the metrics, the measurement, and the communication and accountability on impact achieved. Second, as I mentioned, there is a significant already existing stream of investment occurring across the region. There is also a very relevant problem in terms of the preparedness of the pipeline. And in that case, we are definitely looking at how we can accelerate what we call gender smart, purpose-driven business in a way that could be ready, properly ready for investors that are looking at opportunities and in some cases are making investments even without knowing if the investments are ready to receive capital. How we can create connections between research centers and different intermediate organizations with a final aim of improving the preparation of projects that could be benefited by the growing presence of investors. In that sense, we are working with connecting researchers, as I said, research centers, with the Gender Smart Enterprise Assistance Research Coalition, long title, but it's a consortium of 5 different impact investors that are really looking at how they must observe what are the gender conditions that must be present in initiatives in order to ensure that investments could continue making a difference in companies or groups that are ready to move forward. Then we have the issue of also preparing the new generations of the talent of the new generations, impact on curriculum development, what is needed in terms of new professionals that could be working at the different levels and the different components of the ecosystem, business, regulatory bodies, intermediate organizations, advising, but really creating the ecosystem that is needed to have the proper level of trust and transparency, and then create a new market that will orient investors and investments in the region. So we are working, supporting and testing what we call the Gender Smart Entrepreneurship Education and Training Plus system across Latin America. This is also an initiative that is being supported with the technical collaboration of the Telfair School of Business and the University of Ottawa, but is in contact, in relationship with many other organizations across countries in Latin America, quite advanced in Peru and Mexico in the region, and also a couple of components in Africa. Other element, I mean, in terms of supporting the development of talent in order to continue moving forward with the movement that is being led by the triple impact economy, or business that are part of this triple impact movement, we are supporting with Sistema B in order to create what we call Academia B. This is a movement that is trying to bring to the table what are the real problems confronted by the different organizations that are trying to innovate vis-a-vis relationship with governments, vis-a-vis relationship with consumers and markets. And then there is an opportunity there for different researchers to frankly innovate, finding new solutions and recommending ways of dealing with the issues. And last but not least, what we are doing in this case through this collaboration with our partners and with your institution, which is informing policies and national strategies to expand the impact market, create conditions to attract investors, and to frankly develop the new regulations that could allow companies in different contexts to continue flourishing. So we are very proud. This is the new addition in our portfolio, and we are obviously learning with you and ensuring that we will continue contributing with additional issues in terms of continue developing the legal frameworks, as you said, regulations in a very integrated fashion, as you was indicating, is now needed. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Federico. And it's been amazing to hear your three answers in this second round, given that of your organizations paying attention and developing academic knowledge towards the fourth sector with concrete actions, right? So that's one of the main takeaways. And it is very important to mention that the project, which will be launched in May, is, I think, one of the first international efforts of a whole region that analyzes these specific points in different countries, covering 22 countries of the Ibero-American region for our recommendations, but study in depth 8 Ibero-American countries and regarding their policies, their model legislation, their access to public procurement, impact measurement, taxation, and one of the topics that we have talked about greatly today, which is women empowerment and women leadership. In that way, I would like to open our third and final round of the panel for you to just give us like a little preview on the project that will be launched in a month or so. And the first question is for Rebeca, and it's precisely about the topic of women. Women have been disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as you mentioned, Rebeca, before. And precisely, many purpose-driven companies are led by women, and women use and integrate the SDGs while developing their entrepreneurial projects. So, Rebeca, can you share with us how, in your vision, can purpose-driven companies and the emergence of the fourth sector help to close the gap?
Well, let me start by trying to give you some of the structural conditions that women face in the labor market and in the business community, so we can understand why this is so important. You know that although we have to acknowledge that we have come a long way in terms of gender equity in Latin America, the truth is that still we have this very hard bone to chew. How would you say this expression in English? Un hueso duro de roer, no? That is the part of the economics and the politics, because it relates to power. Yes, to power relations. Yeah. So women labor participation is still in Latin America 25 points lower pre-pandemia than men. Women salaries are 17% lower than men on the same age and education, if you compare by age and education. So 54% of female labor force in Latin America is informal. 54% pre-pandemia, yes? And 1 in 3 Latin American women, 1 in 3 dependent on others for their economic subsistence. That means economic autonomy is really low in Latin America. This is compared with men 1 to 10. Women are 1 to 3, yes, that don't have economic autonomy. And the percentage of seats held by women on the boards of directors of companies that are in the stock exchanges was 13%. 13%, okay? Although women are a majority in the universities and the academia. Yeah, so there is no, it's not a probabilistic result. Yes, it's a result that shows discrimination, okay? So obviously, when we go to the effect of COVID, women are overrepresented in the micro and small size enterprises that have been the hardest hit also in the pandemic. The retrocess in terms of rights for women is terrible. 33% of the women that were in the formal sector have not gone back to work because of the pandemic. Okay, so that means that the tag stay at home, so you protect yourself and you protect others, will become a sentence for women to stay at home forever if we don't do something to allow for really to reconcile family and work. And so that's why it's so important for sector or the B Corps or the triple impact companies for us, because the women issue, the equality in terms of closing the gap on salary discrimination will do so much to combat poverty and inequalities in the region. There is no other measure that you can think of that will have such an impact in terms of inequalities and poverty, probably. Or all the effort for financial inclusion of women in terms of their businesses, and the behavior within the private sector with respect to women. If we really are able to put this on the center, like Federico was saying so vividly, we will do so much for the recovery. I don't think that we can call recovery a recovery of GDP that will be in the framework of more inequality and more poverty in our region. And that could happen. We can have growth with more inequality and more poverty in Latin America. And if we want to preclude that result, we need the private sector. And women will have to be at the center of this. Let me just say one thing that is very interesting that I read. I didn't have this data before, but one of these days I read a piece that gave this very interesting indicator. And it said that among the top 10 best performance ESG funds, among the top 10 best performance ESG funds in the world in 2020, 9 were managed by women. 9 were managed by women. So women have a greater interest in socially responsible investing, like you were saying, Juan Diego, precisely, than men. And investing in companies with gender equality is much more profitable. The Bloomberg Gender Equality Index for 2021, which includes more than 380 companies with strong commitments to gender, has outperformed the European stock market in a 27% ratio since 2017. So I think that we have to give these numbers, and we have to continue to produce the indicators, the data, the statistics that show that investing in gender equality is also smart. Because let me say very frankly, we have been saying this with very sound research for so many years. And I think that at the end, the private sector is getting it, is getting it. Because at the beginning, let's be frank, they didn't believe us. They didn't believe the numbers. They didn't think that this was important. But slowly, I think it has been mainstream much more now, and the results are there. So there is no fourth sector without gender equality in the private sector.
Thank you, Rebeca. Such important words, and what a better opportunity to put in the center gender equality, that of aiming for a redesign of the legal system that has to think about the private sector and the corporation and social and environmental impact. So I think that this is such an important work, and I'm very proud that the project has a specific component on women empowerment. So in that way, I would like to go to Luis Felipe regarding one of the other aspects of the international research project, which is the legal models of purpose-driven companies, the models of governance that UNDP has been working in the region, but specifically about these legal models that are thriving, as Rebeca was saying on her first intervention, because of citizens movements wanting to pass this legislation. We have learned and taken good practices from Ibero-American countries, but also studied international jurisdictions that are a little bit further in the road, like the UK, continental Europe, and the US. Could you share some of your take-ins regarding these recommendations that the project will give in a month regarding these thriving legal structures in Latin America?
Yes, thank you, Juan Diego. I think it is important to reiterate, and we have been saying this since a year ago, actually, that this was fundamentally the systemic crisis. In a way, the way out of this systemic crisis is effective governance to guide the path to recovery and to shape a different type of new normality. So governance is fundamental in this. And what is governance? So we talk about three aspects that we have to focus on. One is certain policies that have to be discussed, considered, policies that have to do, for example, with with how you allocate resources, but also how you have some affirmative action policies and so on. So policies is one aspect. The other is rules, the rules of the game, both formal and informal. So on the formal side, you have to think about those that could become a straitjacket that will shape a recovery we don't want to go. We don't want to see. So we need to think where are these institutional constraints formally, and try to. And that's why the next step of the project is so important, to carefully look at the actual institutional setting and say, and give advice on how to remove those potential constraints, so these type of firms can flourish. But also the informal norms, meaning basically social norms, social beliefs, as Rebeca said. Coordination is fundamentally about what do you think the others are going to do, and then you respond to that. And at the end, social norms are changing. We see behavioral change due to the shock, to the crisis, and we have to take advantage of that. And finally, is the idea of actors, coalitions. So how can we bring new actors to the policy making? And for example, including more women in the decision making, and including more young people in the decision making, and using these coalitions to bring about change. The other is this aspect that we were mentioning for you. We talked about fiscal systems. We talked about legal identity. Actually, we have to, in the study that we did, is it's in 7 countries, Ibero-American countries, we could account as high as 6% of GDP as being produced by these type of firms with purpose. But the first thing is to actually create a very clear legal definition of what it means to be a firm of the fourth sector, and try to see how you create something in which they are not competitively in a disadvantage in the market, and even perhaps with some rules that could give priority to this type of firms, for example, in procurement, as we have discussed. So I think all this is fundamentally important, because in a way, the traditional discussion about industrial policy or not industrial policy, instead of discussing, not because it's not important, but instead of discussing what sectors, why don't we discuss what type of firms we want to see, regardless of the sector? And this is what this is about. So across sectors, we want to see a specific type of firms that are committed with this triple impact idea, and we want them to flourish. And for that, again, we need to adapt. So we want to encourage firms that are for purpose, independently of the sector. And we want to encourage firms that are productively in the social and economic sense and environmentally friendly, independently if they are small or big. So so those kind of that kind of thinking creates a new way to address this new agenda of institutional change for enterprises. And one final point that is just something eventually we also have to discuss, and in a way it's already in the pedagogy that we discussed, has to do with social norms, but also we have to discuss corporate governance, because at the end there is also an issue of corporate governance and accountability to investors, and particularly to small investors that may have interest in this type of firms, and what kind of corporate governance adjustment has to be made. Also to not to leave these firms, if they go public, in the sense of if they are publicly traded, in a disadvantage. So there is still, other aspects that have to be discussed. But I would say that this issue, looking at the fiscal, the legal identity aspects, the procurement elements, all this is already setting the stage for this sector to flourish. Thank you, Juan Diego.
Thank you, Luis Felipe, and it's very interesting what you share with us about the project and UNDP's experience with this. Given that this legal identity is one of the things, one of the enabling factors for these 4 sector businesses, purpose-driven companies, to actually be recognized by both governments and by their own forces of market in their real, in Spanish, naturaleza jurídica, their real identity, right? Of how or why they should be looked more closely by the legal operators. In that sense, there is one very interesting topic that the project covers, and that Federico, I will ask you about it, which is the access of purpose-driven companies to sustainable public procurement schemes. Revisiting and reorienting public procurement can provide an opportunity of growth for the 4th sector, and align public and public sector for public good. Could you share, Federico, your thoughts and vision on reflecting on the recommendations of the project in this preview with us?
Juan Diego, I'm sorry
yes,
to interrupt.
Rebeca.
Federico, sorry, I have to leave. I'm so sorry. I have to connect to close another event. I'm so sorry. Federico, I'm so sorry that I won't hear your answer to this. But it has been a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. Thank you to IDRC and to UNDP, really, the best partners in the world. And Juan Diego, thank you for all your work. I'm sorry I have to leave.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. And it's been great sharing this panel with you. Bye-bye.
So, Juan Diego, responding to your question, I think, I will start by saying that, when we are touching or discussing on the issue of public procurement, I think that we need to recognize, first of all, that, we are discussing or dealing with a very sensitive issue in terms of public policies. It's not a regular one. It's a very sensitive one in terms of the implications it could have vis-a-vis local, supra-local, or supranational markets. It has been always an issue. I would say in the first line of items discussed on every single negotiation, on every single discussion about, organizing markets, scaling up markets towards, being part of global markets. So this is, I would say, point number one. And we saw recently in the context of COVID-19 into Latin America, some elements that need to continue doing efforts to improve the use, the tools, the institutional architecture around public policy. It was, frankly, one of the issues we saw occurring in some of the countries, trying to respond through different approaches to the constraints posed by COVID. So I believe that we have a sense of unique opportunity or momentum here. This is sensitive, this is challenging, but our societies, as we are discussing, are looking for transformations. And in that sense, the idea of going just beyond improving what is existing, or improving the institutional architecture, improving the skills or capacities of our countries, I think that we need to pose ourselves the question of how useful it could be to review public procurement in order to deal with those challenging elements we have in our agenda to continue developing nationally, regionally, and globally. So this is where I'm positioning the particular contributions of the work you and your institution are leading here, with contribution or support or in partnership with us, UNDP and SEGIB. So just to continue with this line of not just speaking about what is emerging from the report or what we are expecting from the report in terms of the final outcomes, but let me tell you, in 2014, the Organization of American States, OEAS, with the Inter-American Government Procurement Network, supported by IDRC, developed a to promote sustainable public procurement. It was a tool to create conditions to continue evolving towards improving green economies. It was extraordinarily useful. It was rapidly adopted by many countries. But one of the main, we tested, just adding one element, we tested how useful it was, or it could have been having, a much more developed set of frameworks across the region, testing this into the context of Colombia in the post-conflict, after signing the peace agreement situation, when Colombia was trying to have access to new areas, regional components or regions within the country, and create conditions through the use of public procurement to reconnect with producers in different forms of agriculture existing in the country. There were many tools, there were many, frankly, initiatives running in Colombia, but I think I'm not exaggerating telling you that it was one of the most powerful, transformative approaches to reconnect farmers, to connect markets, and to position Colombia now as one of the markets offering nationally potatoes in particular, enriched with micronutrients that are really responsible of several kids in the country, but also starting to think about dealing or reaching international markets. So frankly, I think, we need to be serious about the power of public procurement when things are doing with purpose. This is the example that I would like to bring from our experience in Colombia. So now back to the report. I think, you mentioned in your intervention the need of ensuring that, all these changes, all these maybe new recommendations, in this particular case regarding public procurement, are not being made in isolation, are part of a systems approach, a systemic approach, which includes ensuring that, we, as is being recommended in this particular initiative, the development of a plan, a specific plan, including all the dimensions that a plan should be considering to create the proper signals into the market to attract seriously the interest of different companies, but also to permit them to understand and being completely transparent in terms of how decisions are being made. What are the standards? What are the minimum standards that countries are expecting to deal with through the use of this type of instruments, public procurement? So I think it's improving everything in the sense of informing markets opportunities, creating conditions for contracting, democratizing access to opportunities and information in terms of opportunities and decision made around the use of public resources. So all these elements should be structured into plans that should be really connected into the new regulations that are resulting as recommendations in your project. I will not reiterate what was already mentioned by several colleagues through our conversation today, but I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I have the impression that we are at the beginning of a journey with your work, with our collaboration alliance with UNDP and SEGIB, and I hope that, that Juan Diego, you, your team, could help us to continue disseminating, helping the initiative to inform different actors from governments to private sector about the importance of reviewing public procurement and adopting the recommendations that the report is proposing or is sharing, but also how we can go further, because there is still, frankly, a need of continue working, implementing, learning, and adapting moving forward. So once again, I would like to congratulate you for the report, for the recommendations. I'm not going recommendation by recommendation, but I certainly would like to highlight the issue that, I mean, this is challenging. This is a significant contribution. Governments, and more importantly, as Felipe was indicating, societies are keen, open to be part of this transformational movement. Back to you, Juan Diego.
Thank you, Federico, for these closing remarks on this last question. It's certainly an amazing time to be researching and learning about the fourth sector and purpose-driven companies, and these international initiative by SEGIB, UNDP, and Idrc is certainly going to give lots to talk, lots of information to debate, lots of knowledge to share. And as I said before, the project will be launched in May. We will keep all of you posted about the launch of the project and the content of the project, which several documents regarding both jurisdictional reports, thematic reports, and general recommendations that, as Federico mentioned, are very, very interesting, but also very challenging to implement. So with these last remarks, I would like to thank Secretary General Grynspan and Directors Lopez Calva and Buron for your time and your valuable insights with us today. And I would like to thank all of our audience for your time, and I hope you have enjoyed this very interesting session that has ranged from several topics. So thank you, Luis Felipe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you also to esela for the space.
Thank you, Federico. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.